Breaking news, a second GOP senator is now calling on President Trump to resign following Wednesday's deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol. This coming just one day before what could be the start of his second impeachment. Eyewitness News reporter Leticia Juarez live from home with the breaking details. Leticia.
Well, good morning, Rachel and John. That's right. Breaking this morning, we're now hearing from Republican Senator Pat Toomey, who is calling on President Trump to resign, saying it's best for the country. Now, this comes as Twitter has silenced Trump on their platform. He's also been silenced from other platforms after the riots that happened on Wednesday. Now, big tech is also taking some steps to make it harder for the president's supporters to communicate by taking action against the far right-wing platform Parler. Apple has removed the app from its store, saying it's home to violent threats and calls for illegal action. Google also removed Parler from its Play Store, and Amazon booted it from its web hosting service after Parler users celebrated the violence at the Capitol.
Hello everyone, Adam is here, guys. This is not a drill. This is not cable news anchors speculating about what might happen. This is actual United States senators, people with the constitutional authority to remove a sitting president, standing on the record and saying Donald Trump needs to go, not after the next election, not after some lengthy investigation concludes. Right now, immediately, today. And they're not just talking about impeachment, which everyone knows is a slow, grinding process that could take months. They're talking about the 25th Amendment.
Fallout from last week's riot at the Capitol building has continued, with Republican Senator Pat Toomey the latest to call for Donald Trump to step down. A longtime supporter of Trump, Toomey is the second Republican senator to speak out regarding the president's position. While admitting he believed Trump had committed impeachable offences for inciting last week's mob, he suggested resignation was the only realistic option for Trump's departure before his term ends on January 20.
They're talking about Vice President J.D. Vance and the cabinet gathering in a room and declaring Donald Trump mentally unfit to hold the most powerful office on planet Earth. They're talking about taking the nuclear codes out of his hands because they genuinely believe he might do something catastrophic.
Now, this comes as House Democrats vow to move forward with plans to impeach the president for a second time. The single article of impeachment, incitement of insurrection, is set to be introduced on the House floor tomorrow, but only a handful of Republican senators are supporting the idea.
One of the things that I'm concerned about, frankly, is whether the House would completely politicize something. I do think the president committed impeachable offenses, but I don't know what is going to land on the Senate floor, if anything.
You need to understand how absolutely insane this is. The 25th Amendment has existed since 1967. It's been invoked several times, but never, not once in American history, has it been used to remove a president against his will. Never. And now you have sitting senators publicly arguing that this should be the first time. That is not a normal political development. That is not routine partisan bickering. That is the sound of alarm bells ringing inside the United States Capitol, and Donald Trump hears them. He hears them loud and clear, and he is absolutely losing his mind over it. Because two things just happened that shattered whatever remained of his political protection. First, reports surfaced of a message Trump sent about Greenland and the Nobel Prize that was so bizarre, so detached from reality, that senators who saw it started privately, and then publicly, questioning whether the man holding the nuclear codes is mentally stable. We're not talking about policy disagreements. We're not talking about strategic differences. We're talking about career politicians who've served under multiple presidents, who've seen every kind of executive branch weirdness, looking at this and saying something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. Second, Trump decided to launch a unilateral military operation in Venezuela. No congressional authorization, no debate, no consultation with the very senators who are now calling for his removal. He just ordered American forces to go into a sovereign country, capture its leader, and bring him back to the United States like some kind of 19th century strongman dictator. And the Senate's response? They didn't cheer. They didn't rally around the flag. They passed a goddamn war powers resolution to try to stop him from doing it again. That almost never happens. The Senate does not check a president's war-making authority in the middle of his term. They especially don't do it when the president is from their own party. But they did it anyway because even some Republicans are now looking at Donald Trump and seeing a loose cannon with his finger on the trigger. So let's talk about what's actually happening right now inside the halls of power, because the headlines are dramatic, but they don't tell you the full story. Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts went on the record and directly called on Vice President Vance and the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. He didn't tiptoe around it. He didn't use careful lawyerly language. He said Donald Trump is mentally unfit to serve and needs to be removed from office immediately. He pointed to the Greenland incident. He pointed to the Venezuela strike. He pointed to the broader pattern of erratic behavior that's been escalating for months. And here's the critical thing: Markey is not alone.
Trump cannot manage the American economy. And now he says that he's going to run Venezuela and its oil infrastructure. Well, we've seen this movie before. By invading Venezuela and kidnapping President Maduro, Trump has broken Venezuela. And now he claims that he is going to fix it. But now we know what this was all about all along: regime change and oil. We've seen what happens when we destabilize countries on behalf of American fossil fuel CEOs. They profit, our service members get hurt or die, and regions collapse. How do we prevent a civil war from erupting as happened in Iraq? Trump has started another endless war without even consulting Congress. This is reckless. This is illegal, and we cannot let it stand.
There is a growing bloc of Democratic senators who are now on the record saying resignation, impeachment, or 25th Amendment removal has to be on the table. These aren't fringe figures. These are institutional players who understand the gravity of what they're suggesting. They know the 25th Amendment has never been used this way. They know the bar is impossibly high. They're saying it anyway because they believe the situation is that serious. But let's pump the brakes on the 25th Amendment talk for a second, because you need to understand why this is not happening tomorrow, no matter how many senators call for it. The mechanism doesn't work that way. To invoke the 25th Amendment against a president's will, you need two things. First, Vice President Vance and a majority of the cabinet have to sign a letter declaring Trump unable to discharge his duties. That's not going to happen. J.D. Vance owes his entire political career to Donald Trump. He's not going to stab him in the back and hand Kamala Harris the presidency. And the cabinet is filled with Trump loyalists who would never, ever turn on him. Second, even if by some miracle Vance and the cabinet did it, Trump would immediately contest it. Then the matter goes to Congress, and you need 2/3 of both the House and the Senate to keep him out of office. 2/3. Republicans control the House. Most Senate Republicans are still terrified of Trump's base. That vote would fail spectacularly. So the 25th Amendment is not a realistic short-term path to removing Trump. Senator Markey knows this. Every Democrat calling for the 25th Amendment knows this. So why are they doing it? Because this isn't about actually removing Trump through the 25th Amendment right now. This is about creating a record. This is about building a narrative. This is about putting every single Republican senator on record either defending Donald Trump's mental fitness or distancing themselves from it. This is about establishing a precedent so that the next time Trump does something even more unhinged, and there will be a next time, the machinery is already in place. The conversation has already been had. The Overton window has already shifted. What seemed radical and unthinkable 6 months ago now seems like a legitimate topic of debate. And that is how political accountability actually works. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens incrementally. A senator here, a resolution there, a vote that breaks with party lines, a public statement that crosses a previously uncrossable line. Then another senator. Then another resolution. Then suddenly what was fringe becomes mainstream, and what was unthinkable becomes inevitable. That's what you're watching unfold in real time right now. So let's dig into the two incidents that triggered this escalation, because they're very different, but they feed into the same underlying concern about Trump's stability. First, Greenland and the Nobel Prize. Now, we don't have the full text of whatever Trump sent or said about this, but multiple senators have described it as alarming, Senator Markey specifically cited it as evidence that Trump is not mentally fit. And look, Donald Trump has said thousands of bizarre things over the years. His speeches are rambling stream-of-consciousness monologues. His social media posts are full of random capitalization and non-sequiturs. We're all accustomed to Trump being Trump. So when career politicians who've tolerated years of Trump's weirdness suddenly say this particular incident crossed a line, you need to pay attention. It wasn't just Trump being Trump. It was something qualitatively different. Something that made people who've spent decades in Washington look at each other and say, is this guy okay? The Greenland fixation itself isn't new. Trump has been obsessed with buying Greenland since his first term. He's brought it up with foreign leaders. He's asked advisors to look into it. He's apparently genuinely convinced that acquiring this massive Arctic territory from Denmark is both feasible and strategically vital. The problem is, Denmark has repeatedly, publicly, emphatically said Greenland is not for sale. It's not going to happen. There is no scenario where the United States purchases Greenland. Every adult in the room understands this. Except apparently the President of the United States still doesn't get it. He keeps pushing, keeps talking about it, keeps sending messages about it. And at a certain point, that stops being a quirky policy idea and starts looking like a man who cannot distinguish between reality and his own fantasies. Then there's the Nobel Prize angle. Trump has been talking about deserving the Nobel Peace Prize for years. He thought he should get it for his work with North Korea. He thought he should get it for brokering the Abraham Accords. He's brought it up in meetings, in speeches, in private conversations. He's reportedly asked staff why he hasn't won one yet. And when you combine this obsession with the Greenland fixation, with the unilateral military strike, with the general pattern of behavior that's been escalating since he returned to office, you start to understand why senators are genuinely concerned. This isn't about one weird comment. This is about a president who is increasingly isolated, increasingly convinced of his own infallibility, increasingly unwilling to accept any limits on his power or his vision. This is about a man who sees himself as a historical titan deserving of accolades and territorial acquisitions, while the actual work of governing piles up unattended. And that brings us to Venezuela, because this is where the theoretical concern about Trump's mental state collides with the concrete reality of presidential power. Trump ordered American forces into Venezuela, not a drone strike, not a limited special operations raid, a full-scale operation to capture the sitting president of a sovereign nation and bring him back to the United States. No congressional authorization, no notification to the Gang of Eight, no debate in the National Security Council. Trump just decided to do it, and he did it. And the reaction from Congress was immediate and furious. Democrats were predictably outraged. They've been warning about Trump's authoritarian tendencies for years, and here was the proof. But the truly significant response came from Republicans. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough of them that when the Senate voted on a war powers resolution to limit Trump's ability to conduct unauthorized military operations, it actually passed. Several Republican senators broke with the president and voted with Democrats. That is a very big deal. The Senate does not normally push back on a president's military decisions, especially in the middle of an operation. They certainly don't normally push back on a president from their own party. But they did it anyway because even some Republicans are starting to realize that Donald Trump with unlimited war powers is a danger to the country. Now, let's be honest about what a war powers resolution actually accomplishes. It doesn't physically stop Trump from doing anything. It doesn't have a kill switch that prevents him from ordering strikes. What it does is create a legal and political record that Trump exceeded his constitutional authority. It gives Congress a foundation to challenge future operations. It puts Trump on notice that there are limits and that at least some members of his own party are willing to enforce them. And for Donald Trump, that is infuriating. Because Trump does not believe there should be limits on his power. He has said this explicitly, implicitly, and repeatedly throughout his political career. He believes the president can do anything he wants. He believes Article 2 of the Constitution gives him absolute authority. He believes Congress exists to fund his agenda and confirm his nominees and otherwise stay out of his way. So when the Senate passes a resolution telling him he needs permission to use military force, that's not just a policy disagreement. That's a direct challenge to his entire conception of the presidency. That's an attack on his identity. And Trump, as we've seen 1,000 times, cannot tolerate attacks on his identity. He lashes out. He attacks his attackers. He demands loyalty and punishes defectors. He escalates. And in this case, escalating means he's probably going to ignore the war powers resolution entirely. He's going to continue acting unilaterally. He's going to dare Congress to do something about it. He's going to bet that Republicans won't actually cut off funding or impeach him because they're too afraid of his base. And maybe he's right. Maybe he gets away with it. But every time he does this, every time he ignores Congress, every time he acts unilaterally, every time he proves that he believes he's above the law, he adds another piece of evidence to the case against him. He makes it harder for his defenders to defend him. He makes it more likely that the next time there's a crisis, a few more Republicans break ranks. And eventually, you reach a tipping point. So let's talk about that tipping point because this is what Democrats are actually banking on. They know they can't remove Trump today. They know the 25th Amendment is a dead letter. They know impeachment isn't happening while Republicans control the House. But they also know that Trump is not getting more stable. He's getting less stable. He's not pulling back from the brink. He's charging toward it. And every time he does something reckless, every time he sends a bizarre message about Greenland, every time he launches an unauthorized military strike, every time he attacks the institutions that are supposed to check his power, he alienates another slice of the political center. He makes swing voters more uncomfortable. He makes suburban Republicans more willing to consider voting Democratic. He makes the 2026 midterms more favorable for Democrats. And that's the real battlefield here, not the 25th Amendment, not immediate removal, the 2026 midterm elections. Because if Democrats win back the House and make gains in the Senate, everything changes. Suddenly, impeachment isn't a fantasy. Suddenly, articles can be drafted, voted on, and transmitted to the Senate. Suddenly, you have a real trial with real evidence and real witnesses and real votes. And if Democrats do well enough in 2026, if they pick up enough Senate seats, if a handful of Republicans decide that defending Trump is no longer worth the political cost, suddenly conviction becomes possible. That's the long game. That's what all this 25th Amendment talk and war powers resolutions and public calls for resignation are really about. They're about laying the groundwork for 2027. They're about creating a public record of Trump's unfitness that will be impossible to ignore when Democrats have the power to do something about it. They're about forcing Republicans to go on the record defending behavior that is increasingly indefensible. And they're about making sure that when the tipping point finally comes, the case has already been made, the evidence has already been gathered, and the public is already prepared for what comes next. Senator Markey and his colleagues are not naive. They know the 25th Amendment isn't getting invoked tomorrow. They know J.D. Vance isn't going to turn on Trump. They know the cabinet is filled with loyalists, but they also know that political conditions change. They know that public opinion shifts. They know that what seems impossible today can become inevitable tomorrow if you keep pushing. And they are pushing. Every statement, every resolution, every vote, every public call for accountability is another brick in the wall, another piece of the case, another step toward the moment when the political math finally flips. And Trump sees this. He's not stupid about politics, whatever else you think about him. He understands exactly what Democrats are doing. He understands that they're building a case against him, piece by piece, day by day, incident by incident. He understands that every time he does something reckless, he gives them more ammunition, and he cannot stop himself from doing reckless things. It's who he is. It's how he's always operated. He spent his entire life pushing boundaries, breaking rules, daring people to stop him, and for most of his life, nobody did. But this is different. This is the presidency of the United States. There are actual limits here. There are actual consequences. There are people with actual power who are starting to ask whether the risk of keeping him in office outweighs the risk of removing him. And that question, once asked, does not go away. It lingers, it circulates, it gets whispered in Republican cloakrooms and debated on cable news and polled by campaign consultants. And eventually, someone decides to answer it. That's what has Trump panicking. Not the immediate threat of removal, which is still remote, but the creeping realization that his political immunity is eroding, that the people who used to protect him without question are now hesitating, that the wall he's hidden behind for years is developing cracks, and that if he keeps pushing, keeps testing, keeps doing exactly what he's always done, that wall might eventually collapse. So here's where we are. Donald Trump just launched an unauthorized war and captured a foreign leader. United States senators are publicly calling for his removal under the 25th Amendment. The Senate passed a bipartisan resolution telling him he cannot start more wars without their permission, and the 2026 midterms are shaping up to be a referendum on whether Trump finishes his term or becomes the first president in American history removed from office by conviction. That's not a drill. That's not hype. That's the reality of American politics right now. And Trump is losing his mind about it because for the first time in his political career, he doesn't have a clear path out of the danger he's created. He can't tweet his way out of this. He can't bully his way out of this. He can't just fire the people who are investigating him. The people calling for his removal are not subordinates he can dismiss. They're senators with their own power bases, their own constituencies, their own political calculations. And some of them are starting to calculate that Donald Trump is a liability they can no longer afford. That's the nightmare scenario for Trump, not the 25th Amendment vote that won't happen tomorrow, but the slow, grinding realization that his coalition is fracturing, his protection is eroding, and his time is running out. The 2026 midterms are the deadline. If Republicans hold Congress, Trump survives. He finishes his term, battered and weakened, but still in office. But if Democrats win, if they take the House and make gains in the Senate, the machinery of removal will start turning. Impeachment articles will be drafted, hearings will be scheduled, witnesses will be called, and by early 2027, Donald Trump will be fighting for his political life in a Senate courtroom. And this time, the votes might actually be there. This time, Republicans might not save him. This time, all those senators calling for his resignation, all those war powers resolutions, all those documented incidents of erratic behavior and unconstitutional power grabs, all of it becomes the foundation for a conviction. That's the stakes. That's why Trump is losing it. That's why senators are speaking out. That's why the next 11 months are the most critical period of Trump's entire political career. He's not just fighting for policy victories or favorable headlines. He's fighting for his survival. And the people who want to see him removed from office are no longer hiding their intentions. They're standing on the floor of the United States Senate and telling the country exactly what they plan to do if given the power. Now it's up to voters to decide whether they get that chance. If you want to stay ahead of this story and all the other chaos unfolding in Trump's second term, join our newsletter. Links in the description. Hit subscribe because we're tracking every development as this unprecedented constitutional crisis continues to escalate. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next one.